I didn't realize I was worth killing until the funeral flowers started dying faster than my father. I didn't realize I was a target until my girlfriend began measuring my ring finger like a contractor pricing out marble. And I didn't realize the wedding playlist doubled as a countdown until I found the obituary for the second late husband she never mentioned. My father was old-school Boston stubborn and Arizona sunburned. He built a chain of body shops from a single garage with a busted swamp cooler, then spent retirement in Scottsdale restoring a '68 Mustang that always smelled like gasoline and peppermint mints. When a stroke finally took him, the notarized will turned me into the kind of man people Google. House in Paradise Valley, a lake cabin in Maine, a minority stake in 3 shops, a brokerage account that gave my bank app anxiety, and that Mustang with my initials already stitched into the seat. I should have been mourning. Instead, I was learning the math of grief and money, condolences multiplied by commas. Jenna entered my life 3 months before the funeral and slid into it like a well-tailored dress. We met in a Phoenix gym on a Tuesday that tasted like electrolytes and dust. She had distance runner legs and the kind of smile that looks trained. She said she did digital branding for wellness startups. She knew the names of obscure cold plunge companies and posted sunrise hikes on Instagram with captions about grit. She brought homemade granola to my father's memorial, cried in a way that didn't smudge mascara, and later folded my suits like she'd apprenticed at a Nordstrom. I know how this sounds. I've read enough relationship drama Reddit threads to recognize the pattern I ignored. I used to roll through Reddit stories cheating wife comments like bedtime horror. I skimmed Reddit infidelity stories the way some guys scroll box scores. I saw the traps other men described and told myself my life was different because I had context, caution, and the calm of a man in his mid-30s who'd survived smaller fires. After probate, everything accelerated. Jenna moved in with 2 plants and a blender that sounded like a small aircraft. She started dropping phrases like joint future, vendor lists, and intimate ceremony. My friends shrugged because what else do friends do in warm weather states when someone starts smiling too much? The women in my life, my cousin in Toronto, my co-worker in Tempe, said she looked at me like a project finished on time. I ignored it. I lifted heavier at the gym and let her plan walkthroughs with a desert venue that offered a sunset discount. We toured hotels that pumped white tea scent into the vents. I stood on a lawn above Camelback Mountain, pretend drunk on sparkling water, and pictured my father watching with a quiet approval I invented. Then her mother arrived. I met the woman at brunch in Old Town Scottsdale, a room full of tans and pressed linen. The mother smiled like a swipe of credit. She wore a perfume that smelled like someone melting money. She talked about timelines and photographers who capture legacy, and I felt a slickness I couldn't name. On the way to the valet, I caught the mother glancing at my watch, not admiring it, inventorying it. Back home, Jenna collapsed on the couch and scrolled venues while I developed a low-grade hum behind my eyes. I'd like to say my suspicion started with a smoking gun, but real life isn't a wedding day betrayal full movie. It was more like dust on a shelf you only see when sunlight hits it. I was updating insurance beneficiaries with my dad's lawyer, the kind of guy who uses weights only as paperweights, when he suggested a prenup the way doctors suggest sunscreen. Jenna reacted like it was an insult to love. She started using words like trust and forever in a way that felt like she was conjugating them into a contract. She later apologized with a cheesecake from a bakery in Arcadia and a playlist of love songs that all had the same tempo. I accepted, because forgiveness is cheaper up front. The second hint came in a bar in Flagstaff, an Irish place with a busted neon harp after a weekend hike. Jenna knew the bartender by name even though she'd never been to school there. She slipped into the local banter like a regular. When we paid, the bartender called her McAllister instead of her last name, the one I knew from our lease addendum. She laughed and said she used to go by her stepdad's name. A simple thing. People have long stories. But details started sticking to me the way dog hair sticks to black shirts. I work in operations for an outdoor gear company, which means my life is spreadsheets, warehouse visits in Reno, and calls with freight brokers who sound like they were born in truck cabs. I flew to Denver, then Calgary, then down to San Jose in a stretch of weeks that made my suitcase smell like airports. In hotel rooms, I scrolled through crazy Reddit relationship stories the way some men scroll through fantasy leagues. I told myself I was studying male dating strategy Reddit for entertainment, not survival. But something about Jenna's urgency, the exactness of her wedding budget, the speed at which she rerouted my life, pressed on a bruise I didn't know existed. The obituary found me. That's the part that still chills me. It found me because of an algorithm. I was in a Toronto coffee shop with my cousin, halfway through a butter tart, when my phone surfaced a local news related to your interests. An older man, prominent donor, dead 2 years prior. The photo showed an estate on Lake Simcoe and his widow at the service wearing a fitted black dress and a veil more for effect than function. The widow's profile tilted toward the camera, and for a second my brain staged a denial. Different people look alike. Filters, perspective. But my stomach did that elevator drop. I made the screen bigger. The angle of the jaw was Jenna's. The crescent-shaped scar near the hairline, the one she said came from a childhood bike spill, was a watermark. He'd died of a cardiac episode while sailing. Healthy, avid gym goer. Boat found drifting. Autopsy inconclusive. The article mentioned a previous marriage annulled a few years earlier after the sudden passing of another older partner, a private investor in Miami. A pattern written in quiet ink. 2 husbands. Both wealthy, both dead. Both eulogized as kind-hearted and vibrant for their years. Both with wives who moved city afterward to start fresh. No charges. No suspicions that stuck. Comments closed, tributes flowing. And in every photo, the widow wore that same restrained smile I knew from across our kitchen island. I spent that night walking downtown Toronto in icy wind without a jacket, circling block after block, reading and rereading. I had the surreal experience of watching my life zoom out like one of those drone shots over a canyon. I saw the timeline she'd drawn for me without my consent. I saw the angles. I saw how grief makes a man ergonomic to grip. Back in Phoenix, I didn't confront her. No dialogues, no blow-up, no screaming at the ceiling. I did what Reddit relationships cheating revenge threads taught me. Collect, verify, protect. I met my father's attorney at a steakhouse that had brass fixtures and a waitstaff trained in discretion. He listened, not blinking, then called a private investigator he trusted in 3 states. I paid a retainer that felt like tuition and watched my bourbon slide a ring on the table. The PI had the voice of a retired gym coach and the patience of a fisherman. He started with public records. Marriage in Miami to an older man who died of a fall in his pool. A coroner's report coded as accidental slip, no foul play, mild alcohol in the system, widow cooperative. He found a church program from Toronto that listed her as a devoted wife with a memorial scholarship fund in her husband's name. He found an alias used online for a wellness blog that had 3 posts about mindfulness and a link to a donation page. He traced bank accounts that opened and closed in under a year, always with clean exits. He didn't find poison because life isn't tidy. He found proximity and opportunity. Meanwhile, wedding plans expanded like an inflatable mattress. Jenna toured a Cabo venue with her mother, then pivoted to a lakeside resort in Maine to honor my dad's cabin memories. She framed it like a sacrifice, a gift to my grief. She brought me a brochure with sailboats and laughing couples and said the timing would be perfect for foliage. I pictured myself on a dock, a ring on my finger, a new insurance policy in my pocket. I started to understand why my gut had been relentless. I changed the locks on the safe. I moved titles and beneficiary designations into a trust. I told Jenna the lawyer recommended it for tax reasons. She pretended not to be annoyed, then started talking about joint accounts again. I tested her reactions to the word prenup, this time from a different angle, and she smiled thinly like a flight attendant asking for your seatbelt compliance. I ordered home water testing kits. I switched vitamins. I stopped drinking anything she poured unless I opened it first. I watched her eyes while I cooked, while I took supplements, while I sipped. The investigator called from a pay-as-you-go line to tell me he'd spoken to a housekeeper from the Miami condo. The woman remembered the pool evening. She remembered the wife on the balcony reading a magazine while the husband swam. She remembered a phone call afterward to a stepmother in Tampa described as handled. No proof, just edges. The PI also dug up a short-lived LLC in Arizona under the mother's name, a consultancy that existed for 8 months, coinciding perfectly with Jenna moving in with me. Entitled family Reddit stories often make mothers villains out of boredom. This felt like choreography. I didn't want to be a man who trapped another human. I also didn't want to be a headline. So I staged a rehearsal dinner that wasn't. I booked a private room at a restaurant in downtown Phoenix across from Chase Field, a place with high ceilings and good acoustics. I invited a small circle under the pretense of celebrating our engagement. I told Jenna I was flying to Boston the day before to handle a last-minute cabin repair. I drove to Maine instead and staged photos with a contractor friend in front of the lake house, posts that made it look like I was adding a deck. Then I flew to Toronto, met the PI, and collected a folder thick enough to change a life. At the rehearsal, I arrived late, let the room warm with wine and white lights, then asked everyone to put their phones on silent for a toast. I spoke like a man on a ledge. I talked about my father, the kind of man who would sit in a garage and listen to an engine until it told the truth. I talked about love and how it's not a feeling but a series of verifications. Then I projected a short reel because modern lives need modern evidence. Newspaper clippings, obituary photos, public records, the wellness blog screenshot, the donation links. A boat drifting, a pool, a widow smile cloned across cities. No allegations, just presentation. Jenna didn't cry. She froze. Her mother stood so still I could hear the ice shift in her glass. I explained there would be no wedding. I explained the trust. I explained the change in beneficiaries, the removal of my name from anything she could touch, the camera upgrades at home, the new safe, the request for a police welfare check if I missed 2 consecutive check-in texts with my attorney. I described how love, if real, could withstand a pause and a polygraph. I kept my voice even like a man filing a claim. The room dissolved into noise. I left quietly, more empty than triumphant, and Ubered to a Hampton Inn near the freeway because neutral rooms felt safe. I read cheating spouse Reddit stories at 2 a.m., like a man reading a weather report in a hurricane. I didn't sleep. I expected the knock. I expected retaliation. I expected noise the way you expect a second wave after a boat wakes. Nothing immediate happened. That was almost worse. The next day, my building's concierge called to say Jenna had moved out while I was away, escorted by her mother. They took clothes, the blender, the plants, a few items she claimed were gifts. The police called a week later to tell me a complaint had been filed against me for harassment. It was dismissed after I sent them the video of my presentation, the emails from her pushing timelines, the folder of background. The investigator recommended I file a notice with my local precinct about potential danger. I did. The officer at the desk looked like a man who'd seen men like me, tired but intact. This could have ended here. Quiet separation, blocked numbers, therapy. But grief and fear are not linear. 2 months later, I woke at 3 a.m. to a smell like hot pennies and a chirp from the smoke detector. A pot on the stove had been left on, except I hadn't cooked. The gas knob sat half-turned. My camera footage showed a maintenance worker entering with a key he shouldn't have had at midnight. The apartment manager denied everything until the PI pulled logs. We found the worker had a sister who worked remote admin for a wellness consultant, the same short-lived LLC the mother ran. Coincidence, maybe. Pattern, definitely. I moved. I sold the Phoenix condo and the Scottsdale storage unit and bought a weather-beaten bungalow in Portland, Maine, 5 blocks from a harbor that smells like salt and diesel and forgiveness. I walk the eastern promenade at sunrise and watch boats chew up water. The Mustang lives in a rented garage that smells like my father's hands. I work remote more, fly less, wear layers, And don't post sunrise hikes. I also did something petty and necessary. This is the part of the Reddit revenge husband stories people will argue about. I set up a site, factual, clean, no adjectives, that compiled public records with links. Every claim has a citation. Every citation clicks into a document. I didn't write accusations. I wrote timelines. My attorney vetted it. We did not name anyone beyond what's in the public domain. Within a month, it ranked for a handful of search terms I'd buried my face in for nights. I watched referral traffic spike from cities I could guess. I read messages from 2 women who thought they might have dodged something. I did not respond, because doing the right thing often means shutting up. But I slept a little better. Jenna tried once via a letter that smelled like the desert after fake rain. It asked for forgiveness without naming a crime. It said she'd loved me and wished me peace. It said she'd been misunderstood by small-minded people. It was skipped stones across a flat lake. I filed it with the obituaries. Here's what I learned on the other side. Money is a mirror and a microphone. It reflects what people are and amplifies what they want. Inheritance makes everyone declare their philosophy in the language of invoices. Grief makes grown men easy to herd. And love, when real, needs fewer words and more weekends assembling flat-pack furniture in quiet. If you're the kind of man who falls asleep to Reddit cheating stories, updates, and wakes to a gut alarm you can't name, trust the alarm. The brain is a courtroom. The body is the jury. Read the cheating and relationship stories, not to steel yourself against love, but to recognize the choreography of control. And if you're reading this the way I used to read Reddit stories surviving infidelity while thinking it could never be you, I'm telling you the view from the cliff's edge is the same for all of us. It's the same cheap railing and the same drop. I kept the cabin in Maine because my father built me by hand there. The first winter I shoveled until my shoulders burned and let the cold scrape my lungs clean. I started boxing at a gym where retired lobstermen hit bags like they owe them money. I learned to cook a respectable chowder. I saw a therapist who didn't flinch at words like rage and humiliation. I spent Sundays driving the coast in the Mustang with the heat cranked to 11 and the windows cracked just enough to prove to myself I could breathe. I thought a lot about forgiveness because the internet loves redemption the way it loves scandal. Forgiveness without accountability is an empty plate. Reconciliation requires a bill settled by the person who ran up the tab. I didn't get that. I didn't need it. What I needed was something quieter. I needed to look at myself in the morning and see a man who didn't abandon himself when the room got loud. Men write me sometimes because that website is a beacon in certain searches. They ask how to spot it sooner. I tell them to watch for speed. Predators accelerate. They ask what legal moves matter. I tell them to separate assets, sign the prenup, change the beneficiaries, read the policies, and ignore the guilt sermon. They ask if I miss the good days. I tell them the good days were a stage set. They collapse if you nudge the flats. I haven't fallen in love again. I'm not writing a Reddit love stories for men post with a bow on top. I did, however, catch myself the other morning laughing at a stupid joke a dock worker made about my car, and the sound didn't feel borrowed. I took my niece to a Sea Dogs game and ate a hot dog like the world wasn't a Rube Goldberg machine aimed at my neck. I called my cousin in Toronto and listened to her kids argue about maple syrup. I texted my coworker in Tempe a photo of snow and a caption about regret. I scrolled Reddit open relationship regrets without judgment and cheated on nothing but sleep. On the anniversary of my father's death, I drove to the cabin and sat on the back steps. I poured a measure of the bourbon I'd had the night I decided to become my own security detail. I spoke to him without moving my lips because some prayers are private. I told him I'd kept the car alive and the business stake honest. I told him I'd learned the difference between love and strategy. I told him I'd avoided becoming a plot device in someone else's inheritance trap. And then I told him something I'm telling you. Survival isn't a victory lap, it's a commute. You get up, you go. You come home a little better at locks and lights. If you landed here through cheating girlfriend Reddit stories or Aida Reddit husband stories because the algorithm knows the shape of your fear, I'm not going to sell you hope in a bottle. I'm going to tell you to eat, lift, log, verify. I'm going to tell you to find a lawyer who treats your situation like a fire code, not gossip. I'm going to tell you that a prenup is a seatbelt and a background check is a smoke alarm. I'm going to tell you that silence is not noble if it keeps the next man blind. There was a time I thought my story had to end with someone handcuffed. Real life isn't tidy. It's landfill layered with paperwork. My revenge doesn't trend, it deters. My justice isn't cinematic, it's structural. That's not the ending I fantasized about when I drove past venues scented like white tea. But it's the ending that lets me turn off the stove, lock the door, and sleep. So here it is, clean and unornamented. I inherited a lot of things when my father died. A car, a cabin, a ledger of manhood lessons. I almost inherited a death I didn't owe. I didn't marry my way into a wake. I didn't let someone turn my grief into her business model. I chose the boredom of process over the thrill of spectacle. Maybe that doesn't belong in best Reddit breakup stories or Reddit cheating husband stories or even titled like Reddit reconciliation stories, but I'm living it. And when I open the garage and smell gasoline and winter salt, I feel a steady heat inside my ribs that makes the next sunrise look less like a cliff and more like a road.